Hello, church. We're in the midst of our study in Matthew. This is recorded for Sunday. If you are doing your Bible class then, or if you're not able to do it Sunday, then you can do it anytime this week. We're in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount. We're in chapter 5, hopefully finishing up chapter 5 today. That's going to be the main section that we focus on. We've already looked at the Beatitudes and the beginning of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. We looked at how he's called his people to be better than what the Pharisees had been practicing, and what they thought they were called to. Here are some of the sections of the difference between the scribes and the Pharisees' righteousness and the kingdom of heaven's righteousness. And we looked at, don't murder is what the Pharisees said, but Jesus takes it a step further and says, keep yourself from hating your brother. And then the Pharisees said, no sex outside marriage. But Jesus said, take it even further and say, don't lust. And then we're about to look at these middle three sections where the Pharisees said, don't, if you're under oath, tell the truth. And Jesus says, be a truthful person, someone who always tells the truth. And then we'll look at kind of retribution and retaliation. Eye for eye. If you poke out my eye, I get to poke out your eye. If you kick me, I get to kick you, kind of thing. And then from the kingdom of heaven's righteousness, where Jesus says, be the person who is big enough to give in, to stop the madness. And then finally, we'll see that not only just loving your friends, loving the people that you're around, but also loving your enemies and loving those who hate you or persecute you. And that may be the hardest one of all to accomplish and to put in our lives daily, is loving those who treat us poorly, treat us bad. If you haven't gotten or went through the worksheet that I sent out, I strongly encourage you. I will include it in the email in which I sent out the Bible class. If you haven't got it, let me know. You can always email me either at ZT hardesty@gmail.com or zt.familynews@gmail.com. Either way, I'm still working on trying to get everyone's email. I keep adding more and more, so just let me know if you're not getting the email or something, and I'll be sure to add you. I started with a group of emails that went through the directory, but again, I missed some or I misspelled some. So just kind of let me know if you're not receiving emails. And I will get that corrected and uploaded. So let's jump into this text and finish up chapter 5. So this first section is on oaths. So let's start in verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those who are old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say unto you, do not make an oath at all, either by heaven, for it's the throne of God, or by earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Yet you say, what you say be a simple yes or no. Anything more of this comes from evil. And really, to understand what he's talking about here, you kind of have to know what's going on in the background. The Pharisees and the scribes and the rulers had made certain kinds of rules in which they said, if you swear by this, then that means something. But if you swear by this, then that doesn't actually mean something. You can actually break your word. You don't have to keep what you've said. And they're just dividing making rules where there's no rules, and dividing what they say, and trying to play trickery and trying to be dishonest by also obeying the old law of not lying. This section in verse 33, it says, you've heard it said of old, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform with the Lord to the Lord what you've sworn. That is a quote from Leviticus chapter 19 verse 12 and Numbers 30 verse 2. So that's true. But what the Pharisees have done is they've taken "you shall not swear falsely" and made rules that aren't actual rules. They said if you do this, then you have to hold it, but if you do this, you don't have to. And we see this later in Matthew, and I want to jump and read this. This is from Matthew 32, verse 16 through 22. This is where Jesus is doing his woes. And one of those woes was on swearing or taking oaths. So if you read verse 16, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, if anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gold in the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing, but if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men, for which is greater, the gift on or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it, and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it, and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God, and by him who sits upon it." And basically what he's saying here, and what he says earlier, is let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't be trying to mince words and trying to be deceptive. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I really think that's the main point of what he is talking about. And he kind of just, he summarized that in verse 37. Anything more of this comes evil because you're trying to be deceptive. And I thought verse 36 was very funny. It says, "You don't take an oath even by your head, because can you not make one hair white or black?" You can't even do that. And it really calls into mind the humility that each of us need to have, that we try to make these things so great, which they're really not. We try to make ourselves so great and say we have so much control and we can dictate what we want to. But Jesus reminds them that, hey, you don't really have any control. God controls it all, and we should let our yes be yes or our no be no. And that's really the summary of it all. Now, some people will say, okay, this means that we can't take oaths. If we're in a court of law, then we cannot take an oath. It says, in the court of law, he says, put your hand on the Bible. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? And some people say this says that we cannot take that because that's an oath, that's swearing, and we can't do that. I don't think that's the point. I think he's saying is you shouldn't have to take an oath if it comes to your word. If someone comes to you and says, hey, I really need you to do this for me, and you said, okay, and he's like, and he doesn't trust you unless you swear by the gold of the temple or by the throne of God or something, that says something about you. You're trying to be deceptive. And so the point is not to ever take an oath, because there's certain times in which we've seen various people in the Bible take oaths. The point is you should be such a trustworthy individual that your yes means yes and you do it, or your no means no and you don't do that. And that should be as simple as it comes. And I think that's the main point that we find Jesus making in this section. But as we move on, it kind of gets a little bit harder. So this section in verse 38 is done with retribution or retaliation. Verse 38, you've heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone sue you, take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. And I really liked how I've been kind of reading the commentary by Kenneth Chumley on this subject. I really liked how he put it into words about what's going on here. He says, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth appears several times in the Old Testament. It's the principles of equivalent retribution, and it serves several purposes. First, It held people's response for harm they did. Second, it upheld the plaintiff's right to compensation or justice. Third, it took a vengeance out of the hands of the plaintiff and put it in the hands of civic authorities. So instead of someone going, like someone's brother was killed, instead of going out and trying to bring justice and take justice on their own hands, instead they put it in the hands of the civil authority. And fourth, it mandated the punishment fit the crime. Every transgression and disobedience was received a just recompense of reward. This is true, sometimes called lex talionis, the law of equitable exchange, provide for even-handed justice and prohibit the spirit of revenge that fuels feuds and vendettas, vengeance to get more than rather just to get even. And that's what kind of happens when we see in the world, is that people just don't want vengeance, they want to up it. And so what you have is, if one person does something to another, even accidentally, that person gets mad and wants to take vengeance and take it up a notch and do something even worse to this person. Well, that person gets mad and does it even worse. And you have this ever escalating situation of evil going on, and which is very bad and not how it's supposed to go whatsoever. And so the principle of retribution is good. That's how the Old Testament was, set up, was to have the law to carry out this, so that there's some form of justice. But Jesus calls his disciples to be even higher than law. He's telling them to be people that are not trying to get even in every situation. They're not trying to maintain their rights and everything that's going on. Now, you list several examples of this. So verse 39, I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, for if everyone slaps you in the right cheek, turn to him the other also. So kind of that same thing is, you're not trying to get even. You're not going to start a fist fight. Instead, you're going to just turn the other cheek. You're just going to go the other way. You're not going to try to eat even. In verse 40, if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. So this is in civil. They're in civil court. They're suing you. They're trying to take your property. Instead of exercising your rights and trying to keep your property, you let it go, because you know that relationship, that chance for reconciliation, is greater than whatever your tunic or your cloak is worth. You want them to have whatever they feel like they need in order not to damage that relationship. And then verse 41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go with him 2 miles. You just go beyond the what is typically thought of as what you have to do. And back in those days, if you were in the Roman provinces, a soldier could make you carry his baggage for 1 mile. That's what the soldiers were allowed to do, is for 1 mile they could basically get you to carry their baggage for 1 mile. And basically Jesus is saying, if someone puts that in your charge that you need to carry for 1 mile, go with them too. Show them that you are willing to go the extra mile with them. And then verse 42, give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. Now, this is not a life overarching absolute rule that we should all follow as Christians. I think a lot of people read this verse and get kind of mixed up. So if anyone comes up to you and you want on the street, you just have to give, and you just have to give. And what that would eventually do is you would have a class of people who are the Christians, who are poor and destitute and literally have nothing. And then you have the people who are taking advantage of that, basically thieves who are rich because of that. And that doesn't help the situation ever at all, because you're enabling the other people to live how they want to and not change. And you're just giving to that over and over and over again. So that's not what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to, but the principle here is not to let stuff come in between relationships, not let our want for greed and love of money and love of property to get in our our way for love of the other person. And that's the main point that he has here. Whatever we do, we need to do from love, and not because we have the right to own this or that we don't have to give to this person, but because that's what we want to do and that's how we want to live. And again, Jesus is calling his disciples to live more righteous, to have a better um, set of standards than was given in that day and is given today, in fact. And then maybe the hardest section of all is this last section at the end of chapter 5. It says, love your enemies. You've heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. For you do not love those who love you. What reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So right off the bat, it says you shall love your neighbor, which is in the Bible. That is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Second greatest command. But it goes further and says, and hate your enemy, which is nowhere in the Bible. You cannot find a place in the Bible, in the Old Testament or the New, where it says you can love your neighbor but hate your enemy. And Jesus makes this really clear with the Samaritan, who now basically the in question is who was the neighbor to the person who was robbed, and it turns out the one who helped him. And basically, Jesus' point is everyone is your neighbor. And so this is something that the Jews have again taken and said, okay, who is your neighbor? And they basically defined it as just Jews. Jews are our neighbor, and we shall love our Jews, but anyone who's not a Jew, we should hate. And so we should hate our enemy. And you can see how they could reason this out. It's like, okay, we should love our neighbor, and neighbor, of course, means Jew. So what should we do with everyone else? Oh, well, we need to do the opposite of love. We need to hate them. And they've carried this out. The Jews very much hated the Gentiles and anyone that wasn't like them. And who were the enemies? The Romans and everyone like that. They wouldn't have liked this particular verse because they liked hating their enemies. But Jesus calls them again to be higher, to be more noble, to be more righteous, not just outwardly, but inwardly. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Again, tying back to the beatitude of those who are persecuted. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, and to pray for those who persecute you. Why should you do this? Well, in verse 45, it makes it clear that he's saying do this because then you'll be like God. Because everyone in America and the world has blessings from God, whether they're Christians or not. Christians, of course, have more blessings because we're in his covenant, and we have all the things that were talked about in First Peter that we talked about in the sermon on First Peter. But everyone gets his blessings. He gets the blessing of sunshine, gets the blessing of rain, and he is distributed equally. He doesn't say, okay, you're righteous, you're doing good, your yard is going to look better because I'm going to give you more rain and sunshine. That's not how it works. He distributes it evenly, and everyone gets the same amount of rain and sunshine. And so basically he's calling us to be like God. And he's saying in verse 47 that and 46 and 47 is, if you're only loving those who love you, what are you different from any of those people in the world? Everyone in the world loves those who love them. Everyone loves their friends and their family and those who love them back. But the way that a Christian will stand apart, the way that a disciple of Jesus will stand apart in the world, is if they love those who hate them. That is how they will stand apart. That is how they will be revealed as people who follow Christ. And they are perfect as our Father is perfect, which is a very high calling. He ends this whole section. Now, I think verse 48 is not just for this section, but this whole chapter 5 and of how you were supposed to act, because Jesus is calling his disciples to be like their Father, to be like God, to not hate, but to love, not to lust, but to try to help and to think best of, not to divorce for any reason, but to see what is best for them. It is the same thing over and over. Instead of thinking, what can I get and what's best for me and how can I get out of this situation, or thinking humanly, instead, what is best for the other person? How can I, even though it may hurt me, how can I better help the other person? And that is exactly what God did for us. In sending his son down to the earth to die, he wasn't thinking of himself. He wasn't thinking about his own rights and how he's literally done everything for mankind, and yet mankind has rejected him, and he has a right to wipe us off the face of the earth, but he doesn't. Instead, he continues to love, and continues to love a little bit more, and sacrifice a little more, and turn the cheek a little bit more. And what we see is an awesome God that stands himself apart from anything else in this world. And he's calling us to do the same, to do it like our Father does. Now, we will not be absolutely perfect, but that is the goal. The goal is to be perfect. And each day, we try to work closer and closer and closer and closer to that goal. That is what we need to push for. That's what we need to be. This is an amazing section of scripture. I can't wait to talk about chapter 6 with you at Wednesday. I hope that the worksheets that I've sent out and these Bible classes have been helpful for you. I know it's a little bit different. I know this may not be as good as an in-person class. I much, much, much rather be in in-person class in the auditorium, being able to see you, to hear your thoughts and hear your questions. I enjoy that a lot. This is not the way I like to conduct class, but it's what we have right now. In fact, I think when we get back together, we may go over the chapters that I've done during this quarantine type thing. And I just want to hear your thoughts and you to hear each other's thoughts. And we'll go through it pretty quick, but I think that'd be good because you kind of heard my thoughts, but I want you to hear each other's thoughts because you all have a lot to say, a lot of good input. So I look forward to seeing y'all again, and hopefully it won't be too much longer. Take these words, and as I left you last time, I will leave you again. Look at each one of the things that we talked about in chapter 5. Everything from loving your enemies to being peacemakers, to being pure, to not being angry with your brother, not lusting after your brother or sister, just all those different things. Which one of those do you struggle with the most? Ask yourself, which one of those do you struggle with the most? And how can you get better at it? How can you get better at it? And if we all do that, and if we just kind of go down the line, this week I'll work on this, next week I'll work on this, we'll all become more like our Father and become more perfect as our Father is perfect. That is the goal. That is the prayer for each one of us. I wish y'all well. Stay safe. Let us know if you need anything, and have a good rest of the day.